The morning started like any other at the small but elegant restaurant tucked on the corner of a busy city street. Sunlight spilled through the large windows, catching the polished wooden tables and making them gleam. The faint smell of fresh bread and coffee hung in the air, mingling with the soft scent of flowers from a small vase in the corner of each table. For most people, it looked like any other busy day at work, but for Lila, it held a quiet promise she didn't even fully understand yet. Lila arrived early, as she always did, slipping into her apron with practiced ease. She tied her hair back, checking herself in the mirror behind the counter to make sure she looked neat. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. A simple blouse, dark pants, and shoes polished to a soft shine. But there was something in her eyes, a spark that made people notice her without even trying. She moved with purpose, yet there was a rhythm to the way she walked and worked, a rhythm that matched something inside her, a rhythm that had nothing to do with serving tables or taking orders. The restaurant was quiet at first. A few regulars trickled in, nodding at her as she passed by with a tray of coffee and pastries. She greeted them with a warm smile, the kind that made people feel comfortable without needing words. She liked this part of the job. She liked seeing the little moments where she could make someone's day better, even in small ways. But there was always a part of her that wanted something more, something that she couldn't quite put into words. Behind the dining area, in a corner that many guests ignored, stood a grand piano. Its black surface reflected the sunlight and the keys were polished to perfection. It wasn't used every day, just for special occasions or weekends when a musician would come in to play soft melodies while people ate. Lila often found herself stealing glances at it when she walked past. She had loved music since she was a child. She remembered sitting on the floor in her living room, listening to her mother play old records, tapping along to the songs with her fingers. Music had always felt like a secret part of her life, something sacred that belonged only to her and the world of sound she carried in her mind. Today, as she carried a tray filled with breakfast orders, she hummed a little tune under her breath. The melody was soft and barely noticeable, but it made her heart lighter. She had done this many times before, letting music escape in tiny moments. No one had ever asked her to play, and she had never offered. It was hers alone, a private joy that she wasn't ready to share. The morning passed slowly. The restaurant started to fill with more customers, some chatting over coffee, others tapping away on their laptops. Lila moved between the tables with grace, balancing plates and drinks with an ease that came from years of experience. She noticed little things, a child's finger sticky from syrup, an older man struggling with his cup, a woman dropping a napkin behind her chair. She attended to them all with a kind attentiveness that seemed natural. It was around mid-morning when the atmosphere began to shift. A group of well-dressed guests entered, drawing attention without trying. They were confident, their laughter a little louder than necessary, their voices carrying across the room. One man in particular stood out. He had sharp features, an air of authority, and a quiet confidence that made people turn their heads. He looked around the restaurant with a curious expression, as though he was searching for something, or perhaps someone. Lila noticed him immediately, but she didn't look away. She had been trained to be polite, professional, and attentive. She approached the table with a friendly smile, ready to take their orders. As she spoke, she noticed the man's gaze drifting toward the corner where the piano stood. He followed her eyes and raised a subtle eyebrow, almost as if testing a thought. "I couldn't help but notice you humming as you walked by," he said suddenly, his voice smooth and calm. "Do you play the piano?" Lila froze for a brief moment. She blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. The question caught her off guard. Most people didn't pay attention to her at all, and yet here was someone asking her about something she held so close, something she rarely shared. I play a little," she said cautiously, her voice soft. "Not really in front of people, I just practice sometimes." The man's eyes sparkled with interest. "Would you mind playing something for us?" he asked. There was no pressure in his tone, just curiosity and genuine intrigue. Lila hesitated. The piano had always been a private space for her. She had never imagined playing it in front of a group of strangers. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she made a mistake? Her heart started to race. But alongside the nerves was a flutter of excitement, the kind that came when you realize an opportunity has quietly arrived at your doorstep. She looked around. The restaurant seemed to pause, although the other guests didn't know it yet. There was a moment of stillness, almost as if the air itself was waiting for her to make a choice. She could feel the small weight of expectation, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt possible. Taking a deep breath, Lila set down the tray she had been carrying and walked toward the piano. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the bench and lifted the lid of the instrument. The keys gleamed beneath her hands, and for a moment, she felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. It was a feeling she had known for years, yet never fully allowed herself to embrace in front of anyone. She pressed a key, letting the sound resonate in the quiet corner of the room. It was soft, almost shy, but it felt right. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move, finding the rhythm naturally. The melody started slowly, a gentle flow that filled the space with warmth. She didn't think about who was listening or what they would think. She only thought about the music, letting it guide her. As the notes continued, Lila felt a strange sense of freedom. It was as though she had been carrying a hidden part of herself, one that was now finally able to breathe. The room seemed to change around her. Conversations softened, footsteps slowed, and even the bustling staff seemed to pause for a moment. There was a magic in the air, something intangible yet undeniably present. The well-dressed man at the table watched her, his expression shifting from curiosity to admiration. He wasn't the only one. Slowly, other guests began to notice. Heads turned, phones were subtly raised, and whispers of surprise passed between tables. Lila's music had a way of drawing people in, a quiet power that didn't demand attention but earned it effortlessly. For Lila, time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. She was aware of the guests, the restaurant, and her own heartbeat. But she was also somewhere else entirely, a place where the music and she were one. The piano no longer felt like a piece of furniture in a corner. It was a companion, a friend, and a voice she had almost forgotten she had. The first part of her performance was simple, a melody she had practiced countless times alone. But even as she played, she added little flourishes, improvisations that came from her heart, rather than any sheet of music. Each note carried a piece of her story, a memory of mornings spent listening to her mother's records, of quiet nights practicing when no one was around, of dreams she had tucked away for the future. By the time she finished, there was a silence that seemed louder than applause. The guests were mesmerized. Lila opened her eyes, suddenly aware of how many people had stopped to watch. Their expressions were a mixture of amazement and delight, their eyes wide and attentive. For a moment she felt a wave of vulnerability, as if she had exposed a secret part of herself to the world. But it was a good kind of vulnerability, the kind that made her feel alive. The man at the table smiled, a slow, genuine smile. "That was incredible," he said simply. It wasn't flattery. It was truth. Lila felt her cheeks warm, not with embarrassment, but with pride. She had shared something deeply personal, and it had been received with honesty and admiration. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Orders were taken, dishes cleared, and coffee refilled, but there was a new energy in the air. Guests lingered longer, conversations hummed with excitement, and Lila moved through the restaurant with a newfound confidence. The piano remained in the corner, silent now, but it had left a mark on everyone present. And for Lila, it had opened a door she hadn't known was waiting for her. As she wiped down a table and rearranged chairs, she caught her reflection in the window. She saw a young woman who had always been capable of so much more than she allowed herself to believe. And for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to see what might come next. The ordinary day had transformed into something extraordinary. And although Lila didn't yet know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. There was a symphony within her that had finally begun to play, and the world was listening. The morning had settled into a gentle rhythm, the soft clatter of dishes and low murmurs of conversation filling the restaurant. Lila moved gracefully between tables, carrying plates and refilling drinks. But the moment at the piano lingered in her mind like a quiet echo. She could still feel the warmth in her chest from the notes she had played, and she caught herself smiling every time she thought about the surprised faces of the guests. It was a moment she had never imagined sharing, yet it had happened, and the memory made her pulse quicken. The man who had asked her about playing the piano was still seated at his table, finishing a glass of water. His attention seemed elsewhere, though every few seconds his gaze returned to the piano, as if he were considering something. Lila approached his table cautiously, holding a notepad to take his order. "You were amazing earlier," he said without preamble, his voice calm but steady. "Do you play often?" Lila hesitated. She wasn't sure how much to reveal. She had played in private for years, but rarely in front of anyone. Sharing her music felt like opening a door to a part of herself that had always been private. "Not really," she admitted softly. "I just play for myself sometimes. It's personal, I guess." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I understand. Music can be very personal, but I could tell you're very talented, more than most people." His tone was kind, not patronizing. It carried a quiet sincerity that made Lila feel safe, even in her nervousness. The moment stretched, filled only with the low hum of the restaurant. Lila's heart beat a little faster as she tried to figure out what to say. She had learned to respond politely to guests, to answer questions without revealing too much of herself. But this time felt different. There was something in his eyes, a gentle insistence that made her consider the possibility of stepping out of her comfort zone. "Would you maybe play a little more?" he asked carefully. "Just something simple. Nothing complicated. I think the others might enjoy it too." Lila blinked, unsure whether to laugh nervously or shake her head. The thought of playing in front of a table full of strangers, even briefly, made her stomach twist with nerves. What if she made a mistake? What if the music wasn't as beautiful as she imagined it in her mind? She took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her fingers itched to touch the keys again, to let the music flow and fill the space. She glanced at the piano, its black surface gleaming in the morning sunlight, and felt a strange pull in her chest. It was as though the piano was calling to her, inviting her to share a piece of herself that had always been hidden. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just something simple." The man's eyes lit up with encouragement, and Lila turned toward the piano. She adjusted the bench, took a moment to place her hands on the keys, and let her fingers hover, feeling the smooth surface beneath them. For a moment she hesitated, letting the quiet of the restaurant settle around her. Then slowly she pressed the first note. The sound was soft, delicate, almost like a whisper. She closed her eyes and let the melody flow naturally, letting her fingers move with a gentle confidence. She didn't think about the guests, the tables, or the people watching. She thought only about the music, letting it carry her forward. The tune was simple at first, a soft, flowing pattern that made the restaurant feel warmer, calmer. Lila's nerves began to ease as she became absorbed in the music. There was a rhythm to her movements, a gentle dance of fingers across the keys, and with every note, she felt more herself than she had in years. As she played, she could sense the shift in the room. Guests paused mid-conversation, their eyes slowly turning toward the piano. The quiet clatter of dishes and murmurs of speech faded as the melody filled the space. Even the staff moved more slowly, as if giving her a moment to breathe and shine. Lila had played in front of people before, but never like this. Never with an audience so present, so attentive. The man who had asked her to play smiled gently, his eyes reflecting the surprise and delight of everyone who had begun to notice her. It wasn't the kind of admiration that demanded applause or recognition. It was quiet, respectful, and warm. Lila felt a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time, she realized that sharing her music didn't have to be frightening. It could be a gift, a way to connect, a way to touch people without words. Slowly, she began to experiment, adding little flourishes and improvisations to the simple melody she had started with. Her hands moved instinctively, guided by memory, emotion, and the subtle encouragement she felt in the room. The music shifted, gaining a richness and depth that made the notes seem to linger longer in the air. It was a feeling she had chased in private for years, and now it was real, alive, and shared. Guests leaned forward, listening intently. A child at a nearby table stopped picking at their breakfast, wide-eyed and silent, captivated by the gentle swells and dips of the melody. An older couple exchanged a quiet smile, holding hands as they let the music wash over them. The atmosphere of the restaurant transformed, becoming almost magical, a place where time slowed and the ordinary worries of the day faded into the background. When Lila finished the piece, there was a pause that seemed to stretch for several seconds longer than it should have. Then slowly a round of applause began. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was sincere, filled with the kind of appreciation that comes from hearts moved by something real. Lila opened her eyes, feeling her cheeks warm as she looked at the faces around her. The man at the table nodded at her with a quiet, approving smile, and she felt a rush of pride mixed with humility. "You have a gift," he said simply. "You should play more often. People would love it." Lila swallowed, feeling both excitement and fear. She had always dreamed of sharing her music, but she had never imagined it could be received like this. The thought of performing in front of strangers had always seemed daunting, almost impossible. And yet here she was, standing at the piano, having done exactly that and realizing it was not only possible but deeply rewarding. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure what else to say. Words felt unnecessary when the music had already spoken so clearly. The man's friends nodded in agreement, some leaning back in their chairs, others whispering to each other in amazement. Lila could feel the attention on her, but it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt right. It felt like a small but meaningful recognition of something she had carried inside her for years. Something that had always been waiting for the right moment to be shared. As she stepped away from the piano, her hands still tingling from the music, she noticed her manager watching from across the room. The look on his face was one of surprise mixed with approval. He had always known she was a hard worker, attentive and skilled at her job, but he had never seen this side of her, the side that could command attention not through words or actions, but through the sheer beauty of her talent. Lila returned to her duties, but the energy in the restaurant had shifted. Guests lingered longer, speaking softly and smiling as if they had witnessed something rare. Her co-workers moved around her with a new sense of awareness, some stealing curious glances at her, others whispering quietly about what had just happened. It was a small ripple, but it felt significant. Throughout the rest of the morning, Lila found herself smiling more easily, moving with a lighter step. The nervousness she had felt before playing melted into a quiet confidence. She realized that sharing her music didn't have to be a performance in the traditional sense. It could be a simple, honest expression, something that connected her to the people around her in ways she had never imagined. When the lunch crowd began to arrive, Lila felt a renewed sense of purpose. She continued her work, taking orders, serving food, and keeping the restaurant running smoothly. But there was an added layer now, a quiet anticipation in the back of her mind. She knew that the piano was waiting, that it had a place for her, and that the possibility of sharing her music again was no longer just a dream. The man who had requested her to play finished his meal and left a generous tip, accompanied by a note of encouragement. Lila read the note quietly when she had a moment alone. It was simple, but it carried a weight she hadn't expected. It said, "Your music has a way of reaching people. Don't hide it. The world needs to hear it." Her heart swelled with emotion. For so long she had doubted herself, kept her talent hidden, and wondered if it was enough. But now a stranger had seen her, truly seen her, and recognized the gift she carried. The thought was both humbling and inspiring. As the day wore on, Lila found herself thinking about the possibilities. Perhaps she could play more, share her music more often, and let it become a part of her life in ways she had never dared to imagine. The piano was no longer just a piece of furniture in the corner of the restaurant. It was a doorway, a bridge between her quiet inner world and the lives of the people around her. And as the afternoon sun poured through the windows, casting a golden glow over the polished tables and gleaming piano, Lila realized something important. Sometimes, the most ordinary days hold the most extraordinary opportunities, and sometimes, the courage to take a small step, just one note, one song, one moment, can change everything. The restaurant hummed with the quiet buzz of lunchtime. Plates clinked against tables. The aroma of fresh bread and roasted coffee beans filled the air, and conversations rose and fell in soft waves. Lila moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays with practiced ease, but her mind kept drifting back to the piano. The note the man had left her earlier lingered in her thoughts, and she found herself glancing toward the black, polished instrument in the corner of the room. It was there, waiting quietly, as if sensing her thoughts. Lila had spent years keeping this part of herself private, practicing when no one could see, dreaming of moments she didn't think would ever come. And yet now, after playing a simple tune in the morning, she felt a pull she could not ignore. The piano was no longer just a piece of furniture. It had become a bridge to something larger, something real, something she could no longer hide. The lunch crowd was steady but not overwhelming. Lila moved between tables, delivering orders, pouring water and exchanging polite smiles with the customers. Some of the guests who had been present during her morning performance whispered quietly to each other, stealing glances at her as she passed by. It was a subtle recognition, but it carried weight. People remembered her music. People had noticed her. The man who had requested her to play earlier returned with a small group of friends. They had already told others about the woman who could play the piano, and the rumor seemed to ripple quietly through the restaurant. People were curious. Some looked toward the corner where the piano sat, wondering if she might play again. Lila felt a flutter of nerves in her chest. She had not expected this attention. She had always played for herself, never imagining the possibility that anyone else might want to hear her music. Her fingers itched, not from duty but from longing. There was a quiet excitement building within her, a sense that she was on the edge of something important, something that could not be ignored. She glanced toward the piano again. Its black surface gleamed under the sunlight, the keys reflecting tiny streaks of light that danced as people moved past. Lila's heart beat faster, a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Could she do it again? Could she share this piece of herself with more people? "Would you mind playing for us again?" the man asked, a little more formally this time. "Even a short piece? I think everyone would enjoy it." Lila hesitated. She could feel her palms growing slightly sweaty. Her mind raced through questions she had never asked herself before. What if I make a mistake? What if they don't like it? What if I'm not as good as I think? Then she took a deep breath and remembered the feeling she had experienced earlier that morning, the moment when the music had flowed effortlessly, when she had felt completely herself. That feeling was worth more than any doubt. "Okay," she said softly. "Just a short piece?" The group nodded appreciatively and Lila moved toward the piano. The restaurant seemed to quiet instinctively as she approached, the sounds of conversation softening and fading like a gentle wave. The air felt charged with expectation, yet it was not heavy or suffocating. It was warm, welcoming, a space that seemed to say, "Go ahead. This is your moment." She sat on the bench and adjusted her posture. Her fingers hovered over the keys and she took a moment to center herself. The first note she pressed was soft, almost hesitant, but as the melody unfolded, her confidence grew. Her hands moved with a natural rhythm, guided by years of practice and an instinctive understanding of the music she wanted to share. This time, the melody was more complex than before. Lila allowed herself to add subtle flourishes, variations that made the tune richer and more expressive. She felt the music rise and fall under her fingers, flowing like a river that could not be stopped. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, a voice that spoke in ways words never could. As she played, she felt the room transform. Conversation ceased entirely in some corners. Guests turned their heads, captivated by the unexpected performance. A few people pulled out their phones discreetly, capturing the moment, while others simply leaned back in their chairs, letting the music wash over them. Even the staff paused in their duties, drawn to the sound, aware that something remarkable was happening in their restaurant. The man and his friends watched intently, their expressions a mixture of awe and admiration. They whispered softly among themselves, clearly impressed by the skill and emotion in her playing. One of the women in the group leaned forward slightly, her eyes wide as she whispered, "She's incredible. I've never heard anything like this." Lila could feel the energy in the room, the quiet attention that made her music feel alive in a way she had never experienced before. She had played countless times in private, but this was different. This was connection. This was sharing a piece of herself with others and seeing it resonate, seeing it touch people in ways that went beyond applause or compliments. She allowed herself to get lost in the music, letting each note carry her further into the melody. Her fingers danced across the keys with ease and grace, guided by instinct and emotion rather than thought. The piano sang under her touch, filling the space with a warmth and richness that seemed to make the world outside fade away. As she played, she noticed small reactions from the guests. A child's eyes sparkled with wonder. An older man nodded slightly, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Couples held hands a little tighter, their eyes closed as they let the music move them. Even the kitchen staff, visible through the open pass, leaned in for a moment to listen, caught by the unexpected beauty of the performance. For Lila, the experience was almost surreal. She had always loved music, but she had never imagined that sharing it could create this kind of impact. The piano had become a bridge, connecting her world with the lives of the people around her. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a sense that she was doing exactly what she was meant to do in that moment. The melody shifted, moving from soft, gentle phrases to a more lively and playful section. Lila allowed herself to experiment, improvising slightly, adding a spark of energy that made the room come alive in a different way. Guests smiled, some tapping their fingers on the table, others swaying gently to the rhythm. The energy in the restaurant shifted completely. It was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a space where music, life, and connection flowed together seamlessly. Lila's eyes met the man's briefly. He nodded at her, a subtle gesture of encouragement and admiration. It was a quiet acknowledgement that he understood what was happening, that he recognized the courage it took for her to step forward and share her gift. She smiled back, grateful for his kindness and the trust he had shown by inviting her to play. When the piece came to an end, there was a moment of stunned silence. The notes hung in the air, lingering like a delicate perfume, and then the room erupted in applause. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was heartfelt, genuine appreciation. People cheered softly, some calling out compliments, others simply smiling in awe. Lila felt a rush of emotion wash over her. Pride, relief, joy, all mixed together in a powerful wave that left her almost breathless. She stood up, her hands still tingling from the music, and took a small bow. The applause continued, filling the room with a warmth she had never expected. She could feel the eyes of every guest on her, not with judgment or expectation, but with admiration and gratitude. It was a feeling she would never forget. The man who had first asked her to play approached her quietly. "You have a gift," he said again, more earnestly this time. "Not many people have something like this. You should never stop sharing it." Lila nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. Words seemed insufficient. She had always doubted herself, had always worried that her music was only meaningful to her. But now she saw that it could touch others, that it could create moments of joy and wonder that transcended ordinary life. Throughout the afternoon, she continued her work in the restaurant, but the energy around her had shifted completely. Guests lingered longer, conversations carried a new warmth, and the staff moved with a sense of quiet excitement, aware that something special had just occurred. The piano remained silent in the corner now, but its presence was electric, a reminder of what had just happened and what could happen again. Lila felt a new confidence growing inside her. She realized that her music was more than a private escape. It was a bridge to connection, to joy, to something larger than herself. She had spent years keeping it hidden, doubting its worth, but now she understood that sharing it was not only possible but necessary. As the lunch crowd thinned and the sunlight shifted to a golden glow, Lila paused for a moment, looking toward the piano. She felt a quiet sense of gratitude and possibility. The piano was more than an instrument. It was a key to a door she hadn't yet fully opened, a door that led to moments she had only dreamed about. She knew that her life at the restaurant would never be the same. The experience had awakened something inside her, a courage, a passion, and a sense of purpose she had not fully recognized until now. And as she moved to clear the last few tables of the afternoon, she carried with her the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The music had connected her to the world in a way she had never expected. And for Lila, that connection was just the first step toward something extraordinary, something that would continue to grow with every note she played, every melody she shared, and every moment she allowed herself to step into the light. The afternoon sun poured into the restaurant, casting warm golden light across the polished wooden tables. Lila moved between the remaining guests, delivering plates and refilling drinks, but she could feel a new energy in the room. The moment she had shared at the piano earlier seemed to linger, not just in her mind, but in the air around her. Guests were more attentive, conversations carried a quiet excitement, and even the staff moved with a subtle sense of curiosity, glancing toward the piano every so often. It wasn't long before the man who had first encouraged her to play approached again. This time he was accompanied by a small group of people who clearly hadn't been present earlier. They had heard whispers about the waitress who could play the piano, and their curiosity was palpable. "Excuse me," one of them said politely, "but we heard you play earlier. Would you mind playing for us?" Lila froze for a moment. Her hands instinctively went to her apron, smoothing it nervously. She had already played twice that day, and though the thought of performing in front of strangers made her stomach flutter, she could feel the music inside her stirring again, eager to be released. I can play a little," she said softly, her voice steady despite the nervousness she felt. "Just a short piece." The group nodded, settling in at a nearby table, their eyes filled with anticipation. Lila took a deep breath, allowing the warmth of the sunlight and the soft hum of the restaurant to center her. She walked toward the piano, feeling the smooth wooden floor beneath her feet, and sat down on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys, and for a moment, she closed her eyes. The restaurant seemed to fade around her. The conversations, the clatter of dishes, the faint smell of coffee and bread, all of it receded as the music began to flow. She pressed the first key, letting the soft note linger in the air, and then continued with a melody that felt familiar and comforting. As she played, Lila noticed the subtle reactions of the guests. Some leaned forward, mesmerized, their eyes following her hands as they moved across the keys. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Even the staff paused for a moment, quietly acknowledging the beauty of the performance without disturbing the flow of the restaurant. The melody grew richer as Lila added small flourishes, improvisations that came naturally, guided by emotion rather than thought. Each note seemed to carry a part of her story. The years of practice, the quiet moments alone, the longing to share her music with the world. The room seemed to breathe with her, a shared rhythm that connected her to everyone present. When she opened her eyes, she saw expressions of genuine admiration on the faces around her. The man who had first encouraged her to play smiled warmly, his eyes reflecting pride and amazement. The new guests watched in awe, clearly moved by the unexpected beauty of her music. Some whispered to each other, trying not to disturb the flow of the performance, while others simply sat quietly, absorbed in the sound. Lila felt a strange sense of calm and exhilaration. She had always worried about performing in front of others, fearing judgment or mistakes. But in that moment, she realized that her music wasn't about perfection. It was about connection. It was about sharing a part of herself and seeing it touch others in ways words never could. The melody shifted again, moving into a more lively, playful section. Lila allowed herself to experiment, letting her fingers dance across the keys with a freedom she had rarely allowed herself before. Guests smiled, some tapping their fingers to the rhythm, others humming along quietly. The restaurant was no longer just a place to eat. It had transformed into a space alive with music, warmth, and connection. When the piece came to an end, there was a moment of silence, as if the room itself was savoring the final note. Then slowly applause began to ripple through the restaurant. It started quietly with one or two people clapping and quickly grew into a heartfelt, genuine show of appreciation. Lila felt her cheeks warm as she stood, bowing slightly, grateful for the recognition yet humbled by it. The man approached her again, this time with a small envelope in hand. "We wanted to give you something," he said quietly. "A small token to show our appreciation. You have a rare gift and it deserves to be encouraged." Lila accepted the envelope, feeling a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Inside was a handwritten note with words of encouragement and a generous tip. The note read, "Your music touches the soul. Keep sharing it. The world needs to hear you." Her heart swelled with emotion. For so long she had kept her talent hidden, doubting its worth and fearing that it wouldn't matter to anyone else. But now she had proof that her music could make a real impact, that it could move people, bring joy, and create moments of connection. As the afternoon continued, more guests arrived, some having heard the story of the waitress who could play the piano. Whispers spread through the restaurant, and Lila found herself at the center of a quiet excitement she had never experienced before. People were genuinely interested, curious to see her perform, and eager to experience the music that had already touched so many hearts that day. Despite the growing attention, Lila remained grounded. She continued her work, taking orders, serving food, and attending to the small details that kept the restaurant running smoothly. But there was a new confidence in her step, a sense of purpose that had not been there before. The piano was no longer just a piece of furniture. It was a door to possibilities she had never dared to imagine. During a brief lull in the afternoon, Lila had a moment alone. She sat at the piano, letting her fingers hover over the keys, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. Music had always been a private companion, a source of comfort and expression in moments when the world felt overwhelming. Now it had become a bridge, connecting her to others in ways she had never expected. She began to play softly, a gentle melody that filled the restaurant with warmth. It was not a performance this time, not in the traditional sense. It was a quiet sharing, a moment of connection with the space, the guests, and even herself. As she played, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that went beyond applause or recognition. It was the feeling of being truly alive, of allowing her passion to flow freely and touch the world around her. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of music, service, and quiet admiration. Guests lingered longer, conversations carried a new warmth, and the staff moved with a subtle sense of pride, aware that they were witnessing something special. Lila's confidence grew with each passing moment, and she began to see herself not just as a waitress, but as someone capable of creating joy and inspiration through her music. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the restaurant, Lila found herself reflecting on the day. She had shared her music in ways she had never imagined, and the response had been overwhelmingly positive. She had touched people's hearts, created moments of joy, and discovered a sense of purpose that went beyond her daily routine. In that quiet evening light, she realized that her life had shifted. The ordinary work she had performed for years had transformed into something extraordinary. The piano, once a distant symbol of a private dream, had become a pathway to connection, expression, and opportunity. She understood now that her music was not just a hobby or a personal escape. It was a gift, one that could bring happiness, inspiration, and even change to the lives of others. The day ended with Lila cleaning up the last few tables, her mind still buzzing with the events that had unfolded. She glanced one last time at the piano, its black surface gleaming in the fading sunlight, and felt a quiet determination. She would continue to play, continue to share her music, and continue to explore the possibilities that lay ahead. That evening, as the restaurant emptied and the staff prepared to close for the day, Lila walked home with a lightness in her step. She thought about the guests, the notes that had flowed through her fingers, and the smiles she had seen. The world felt larger, brighter, and more open than it had before. She knew that her journey with music was only beginning, and the experiences of that day had given her the courage and confidence to embrace it fully. And as she lay in bed that night, the notes from the piano still ringing softly in her mind, she felt a deep sense of gratitude for the opportunity, for the encouragement, and for the realization that sometimes the most ordinary days can hold the most extraordinary moments. The piano had given her more than a performance. It had given her a glimpse of what her life could become when she dared to share her gift with the world. The next morning, the restaurant was already buzzing with life when Lila arrived. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, painting the tables in soft golden tones. As she stepped inside, she felt a mixture of excitement and calm. The events of the previous day still lingered in her mind, the applause, the smiles, the note of encouragement she had received. She could hardly believe how quickly things had changed. Guests were beginning to arrive, some regulars greeting her warmly, while others whispered quietly among themselves, curiosity lighting their faces. Word had spread about the waitress who could play the piano, and it seemed that everyone wanted to see her, to hear her, and perhaps to witness the magic they had been told about. Lila felt a flutter in her chest, but it was not fear. It was anticipation, a sense of readiness. She had discovered something inside herself that could not be hidden any longer. Her music was not just for her. It belonged to anyone who wanted to listen. She moved to her station, arranging menus and checking the tables, but her eyes kept drifting toward the piano. It stood there in the corner, polished and waiting, as if it had been anticipating this day just as much as she had. The morning passed in a blur of orders and service, but Lila felt a quiet sense of purpose. Each time she walked past the piano, she felt a tingle of excitement, a reminder of what she had discovered about herself. She knew that the day would come when she would sit at it again, and this time she felt ready for whatever might happen. By late morning, a small group of guests had gathered near the piano. They had heard of her performances and were quietly waiting, their expressions a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Lila approached them, a soft smile on her face. "Would you like to hear me play?" she asked gently. Their eyes widened with delight and they nodded eagerly. One of them whispered, "We've heard so much we had to see for ourselves." Lila took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment and then she pressed the first note. The melody flowed naturally, soft at first, then gradually growing richer, more complex. She allowed herself to be carried by the music, improvising gently, letting emotion guide her fingers. The guests leaned forward, captivated. Their faces reflected wonder, joy, and appreciation. The restaurant seemed to transform around her, the ordinary sounds of dishes and footsteps fading into the background as the music filled the space. Lila played not for recognition or applause, but for the pure joy of sharing, for the connection that music allowed her to make with the people around her. As she continued, she noticed small reactions from the audience. A child's eyes sparkled, a couple smiled and held hands. An older man tapped his fingers gently on the table in rhythm. Each reaction reminded Lila that her music had the power to touch people in ways words could not. It was a gift, one she had long kept hidden, but now it was alive, vibrant, and appreciated. When the piece came to an end, the room erupted in applause. It was sincere, heartfelt, and filled with a warmth that made Lila's cheeks flush. She stood and bowed slightly, smiling at the guests who had taken the time to pause, to listen, and to feel. The experience left her with a deep sense of fulfillment, one that went beyond any tip or compliment. It was a reminder that sharing her talent was more than an act. It was a connection, a bridge between her and the world. Later that afternoon, a man approached her quietly. He introduced himself as a local music teacher and spoke with a calm authority that made Lila listen carefully. "I heard about your performance yesterday," he said, "and I must say it was extraordinary. You have a rare talent and I think it deserves to be nurtured. Have you ever considered taking lessons or performing more regularly?" Lila's heart skipped a beat. She had never imagined that someone would take such an interest in her music beyond a restaurant performance. The thought of studying formally, improving her skills, and sharing her talent with a wider audience was both thrilling and intimidating. I've never really thought about it," she admitted softly. "I just play for myself," he smiled kindly. "That's wonderful, but there is a world of opportunities for someone with your skill. You could perform at events, collaborate with others, even teach someday. Your music has the power to inspire, and I think you owe it to yourself to explore that." Lila nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness stirring inside her. The idea of stepping beyond the comfort of the restaurant, of performing for larger audiences or pursuing her passion more seriously, had never seemed possible. But now, with encouragement from strangers and recognition from people she respected, it felt attainable. The afternoon passed with more guests requesting music. Lila found herself alternating between her duties as a waitress and moments at the piano. Each performance was met with quiet appreciation and soft applause. She noticed the subtle way her music changed the atmosphere. The room felt lighter, warmer, more alive. Even co-workers who had initially watched from a distance now approached her with admiration and gentle questions, eager to understand the transformation that had occurred. By early evening, the restaurant began to empty, leaving Lila with a quiet moment alone. She sat at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, and allowed herself to reflect. The past few days had been extraordinary. She had discovered a side of herself that had long been hidden, shared it with others, and witnessed the impact it could have. For the first time, she felt a sense of clarity about who she was and what she could offer the world. As she played softly, she imagined the possibilities ahead. She could continue to play at the restaurant, of course, but she also began to dream bigger. Perhaps she could perform at local events, collaborate with other musicians, or even record her own music. The thought was both exhilarating and daunting, but it was a path she now felt ready to explore. Later that night, as she walked home, Lila reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered her early years, the quiet moments alone with music, the private dreams she had held close to her heart. Those moments had shaped her, prepared her, and now they were guiding her toward something greater. She realized that her life had shifted in ways she had never imagined. The piano, once a symbol of private longing, had become a tool for connection, expression, and opportunity. Her talent was no longer just hers to keep. It was a bridge to the world, a way to touch hearts and inspire others. The next morning brought new challenges and opportunities. Lila returned to the restaurant with a renewed sense of purpose. She moved with confidence, attentive to her duties but also aware of the possibilities that lay ahead. The piano waited in the corner, a constant reminder that her life could be more than routine. It could be vibrant, meaningful, and filled with music. Throughout the week, word of her performances spread. Guests returned not just for the food but for the experience of hearing her play. Local journalists and bloggers began to take notice, sharing stories of the waitress whose music transformed the atmosphere of an ordinary restaurant into something extraordinary. Lila felt a mixture of humility and pride. She had never sought recognition, yet she realized that sharing her gift could inspire others, and that was a reward in itself. One afternoon, a young woman approached her quietly while she was cleaning tables. "I heard you play yesterday," she said softly. "I just wanted to tell you, it was beautiful. I've never felt so calm and happy in a restaurant before." "Thank you," Lila smiled, her heart warming. "Thank you," she replied. "I'm glad you enjoyed it." It was a small moment, but it carried immense significance. She realized that her music could touch people in ways that words often could not. That realization gave her courage, a sense that she was on the right path, and that sharing her gift was not only meaningful but necessary. By the end of the week, Lila's routine had changed. She continued her work at the restaurant, but she also made time to practice more intentionally, to explore new melodies, and to consider opportunities beyond the familiar walls of her workplace. She began to dream more boldly, imagining performances at local events, collaborations with other musicians, and even the possibility of teaching. Each day as she played the piano, she felt a growing sense of connection, not just to the music, but to the people who listened, to the guests who returned to hear her, and to the larger world that seemed suddenly full of possibility. She realized that her gift was not just a source of personal joy. It was a way to bring beauty, comfort, and inspiration to others. One evening, as the restaurant emptied and the sun set behind the city skyline, Lila sat at the piano once more. Her fingers moved gently over the keys, playing a melody that was both familiar and new. The notes flowed freely, carrying her thoughts, her emotions, and her dreams. In that moment, she felt fully alive, fully herself, and fully aware of the possibilities that lay ahead. She had started as a quiet, diligent waitress, keeping her talent hidden and her dreams close to her heart. But through courage, opportunity, and the willingness to share her music, she had discovered a new path. The piano had become a symbol of hope, expression, and connection, a reminder that even ordinary days could hold extraordinary moments. And as the final notes lingered in the air, she knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Her music would continue to grow, to reach people, and to transform not just her life but the lives of those who heard it. The journey ahead was unknown, but for the first time, Lila felt ready to embrace it fully with courage, passion, and an open heart. Her story was no longer just about serving tables or quietly practicing in private. It was about sharing a gift, creating joy, and stepping into the light. And as she closed the piano lid and took a deep breath, she felt a quiet smile spread across her face. The world was listening and she was ready to play.